Your own Narad.
Namaste all, and welcome to Evenings with Sraddhalu. Today will be very important because it's the continuation of last week from the record of yoga, direct and divine knowledge, part 2. And since there are so many questions, Sraddhalu will answer those. We'll see how far we get.
Thank you, Narad.
You will.
Last time we read from Sri Aurobindo's text from his record of yoga, where he describes jnana as spiritual knowledge, spiritual experience, and then the action which flows from that spiritual knowledge. So, or in other words, he phrases it as spiritual and divine knowledge. But it's not merely in the mind, it is equally in a fully embodied experience. It is also the basis for an action that flows fully, freely, direct from that consciousness of knowledge. So there are 3 facets to it. Of the part which is the divine knowledge in the mind, there are, as we saw, 3 or 4, depending on how he categorizes it, aspects to that divine knowledge. One we saw was the revelation, where the knowledge is seen and known in its entirety, nothing is hidden. Then there is the inspiration, which is as if something heard and received, but containing much more the process, movement, the rhythm of its unfoldment. And then there is the intuition, which we have to use the Sanskrit terms, drishti, shruti, and smriti. The intuition as if something remembered which was forgotten. You'd forgotten that you knew it, and now it's remembered as if. And this is the nature of the intuitive dawning of the knowledge, but it's also an experience. And then the 4th facet of it is the discrimination. And Sri Aurobindo highlighted the importance of discrimination today, particularly at this stage in human evolution, because it is that which will prevent the immixture of other things. When this knowledge comes, precisely because it is so much brighter, so much truer, it has a stronger luminosity, force, truth. But when it comes in a part and the mind quickly catches, distorts or adds things to it or chops off things, reducing it to its preferences, there is a huge distortion, and the extent of the distortion can be that much greater, that much darker, precisely because this is so much brighter. And so this is unfortunately the condition of the human mind, which is not trained to receive this higher knowledge. We saw last time the characteristics of the educational system, which is designed for receiving this higher knowledge, as distinct from the modern educational system, which is designed only to train the intellect and operate within its narrow domain. The fundamental approach is so different. For the higher diviner knowledge, you must train the mind to become silent, to stay in silence and receptive as the thing, the knowledge dawns, unfolds, is received, and then maybe is even articulated. And the mind has to remain still and quiet, not add to it, not remove from it, but allow it to reveal and unfold and even decompress, unroll itself in a complete revelation. We saw also that when that comes, if we remain receptive and open, it pulls us into its character of experience, its way of knowing. And then eventually that settles in us more and more and changes our current mind. Its mold, its substance, its way of working is gradually transformed by the descent of the higher. All of these he will be elaborating in texts that we will see later. But this was just to quickly summarize the key points of last time's discussion. There were many questions which we had kept for today. I'm not sure how many we will cover today, but let's just go ahead. First question is from Pascal. He's appreciating the content of the video. And then he says, however, Sraddhalu speaks of divine knowledge in a way from above. And if on the Gita, I'm just reading, this divides with the blazing lamp of he raises the incandescent knowledge within us. or divine inner being, which raises within us the divine lamp, blazing lamp of knowledge. These are translations from his French. Or a fourth one is raises the lamp of inner knowledge and floods all of our existence with his happy and divine radiances. So the question Pascal has, is this divine knowledge that we are supposed to find above the same as that which we can find through the heart and union with the divine? The two approaches are undoubtedly complementary. And then he asks, I would love to hear also a few words about Sarama, the celestial hound, which is also linked to intuition, because these Vedic deities I do not know. I know nothing about them, but it resonates deeply. So yes, this is a very important question, and the distinction is important. I'll start first with a general observation. The divine is one. So there is only one relation, finally. But because the divine is also infinite potential, with infinite aspects, infinite variations of relationship or means of being known, knowing himself in infinite variations. So naturally, in our experience with the divine, there are infinity of variations. But as we enter in closeness with the divine consciousness, there are broadly two directions subjectively that we feel. The approach to the divine is felt subjectively within us as a closeness, intimacy to who I am, because I am subjectively, ultimately one with the divine. So there is this subjective inward turn, as if, where eventually you find yourself, I, the sense of I, merges into the consciousness of the divine. There's also an objective experience where you find as if in the divine consciousness, which is as if now descending into you, you are ascending to join. So it's these two facets which become now the broad lines of common spiritual experience. Ultimately, it's the same divine, but subjectively and objectively in the experience, there's a difference. And the difference can be significant, especially when we turn to the inward experience subjectively. And again, inward has two facets. One could say, I, and I join with the self. Or one could say, I, and I join with the soul, the psychic being, which is a part of the divine consciousness, but is not the self. And so there's a difference there. So the difficulty always is in the vocabulary used and the context used. So when you say inner knowledge, is it from the psychic? Is it from the self as subjectively felt? Or even as it descends from above, and it could be felt as an inner knowledge because the descent is felt in the inner ranges first, and from there it flows outward. Which of these three is being referred to when we speak of the inner knowledge? So in general texts where the distinction is not so important, Sri Aurobindo does not make the distinction. In the context of the Bhagavad Gita, for example, the distinction or the importance of the psychic being is not so strong. It is implicit. There is a reference to the thumb-sized person within, but that's about all. It is not made a primary focus of the consciousness and the identification with the divine. So most of the quotations which Pascal has referred to represent the divine knowledge as it settles within us and from within emerges into the surface layers of consciousness. In Sri Aurobindo's own vocabulary, he makes these three distinctions quite clear. And I will read from a few lines. So, this is from his letters, where he speaks of knowledge, experience, and realization. He says, knowledge by thinking process would not be spiritual knowledge. True knowledge comes by spiritual realization and experience. This is the jnana. There are such realizations and experiences. Realizations are the essence of knowledge. Thoughts about them, expressions of them in words, are a lesser knowledge. There we don't use the word jnana. And if the thoughts are merely mental without experience or realization, they are not regarded as jnana in the spiritual sense at all. So now you understand here the word jnana as it was used in the text we read last time, and possibly what we might read today, is always a spiritual experience where you are one with what you know, but in that domain, not a mere mental thought or mere mental representation or a verbal articulation of something understood, but secondarily. It is always something experienced and generally of a grade of something of the spiritual consciousness. Then again, in the same series of letters, he says, it is in the silence of the mind that the strongest and freest action can come. For example, the writing of a book, poetry, inspired speech, etc. When the mind is active, it interferes with the inspiration, puts in its own small ideas which get mixed up with the inspiration, or starts something from a lower level, or simply stops the inspiration altogether by bubbling up with all sorts of mere mental suggestions. So also, intuitions or action, etc., can come more easily when the ordinary inferior movement of the mind is not there. It is also in the silence of the mind that it is easiest for knowledge to come from within or above, from the psychic or from the higher consciousness. So I read this in some detail because you see at the end he very clearly makes two directions distinctly. From within the knowledge comes, from above the knowledge comes. From within it's the psychic, from above it's the higher consciousness. So psychic is not higher consciousness. Obviously, there's a difference, at least in the vocabulary as Sri Aurobindo uses. So let's understand that a little more. I think this is all we need to read from for this. So what is the distinction? The psychic being a projection, a part of the self put out, entering space and time, is partial. It does not have the fullness of the self. In substance, it is the same. In potential, therefore, it carries the full potential of self. But in what it carries and how it expresses itself, its capacity to express, its capacity to organize are not fully developed. And because it is in space and time and in limitation, it can grow and evolve. For the self, which is always complete, there is no compulsion or requirement or even possibility of growth and evolution, at least in our sense. It can, of course, draw out unendingly possibilities, but it's not growing. They were always there. So in the psychic consciousness, you have the essence of the knowledge and the full potential of its unfolding, where it is not yet developed. And so to that extent, when the psychic influence comes forward strongly, or the psychic being is itself emerging, you have spontaneously two of the facets of the intuition present. First and foremost is the discrimination, the viveka. And second is in the touch, the intuition of something known. The moment you think of something you know, you enter into contact with an experience, and there's a spontaneous knowing of it, but in a limited extent. It is not the revealed knowledge which is what descends from above. So it will know, this is true, this is divine, oh, this is mixed, this feels wrong. To that extent, it can reveal. So the discriminating aspect is very strong, absolutely sure, but also in its knowledge that comes with, which is almost intuitive as something remembered, it is there but limited to that moment and to that contact, not necessarily complete, but enough to identify what is true and separate from what is false. Hence, the emergence of the psychic influence within us, Sri Aurobindo considers an essential requirement for the free and direct play of intuition to minimize distortions that might happen when intuition first dawns in you. So this would be like a precursor, a preparatory state. But what the intuition brings is a greater and more revealed knowledge, for which the psychic has the discrimination to support. but not yet the fullness of that intuitive consciousness. So in the intuition consciousness, you can also have a series of progressive luminosities. So as the knowledge dawns in you, you have specific experience, insight, even as a living experience, and the force of experience, and from it, therefore, the action can flow from that grade, from that state of knowing, of being. But also that can become wider, deeper, more complete, more luminous, etc. So the content of what is revealed can continue to grow. In the beginning, it may come as brief flashes, brief insights, a flash, and then it stops. Or it may be a flash followed by a rippling effect, flash, 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 as if. Or as the consciousness learns to remain constant, you have flash, flash, and then your attention turns. What about this? Flash, flash. So, like lightnings, revelations, and the consciousness as it widens your receptive base, it becomes more complete. As the substance of your mind is more and more infused with this higher grade descending, it is acclimatized, and then the flash need not be in an instant. It can be a light that stays and then slowly recedes, and again comes in a flash and stays and recedes. So more and more it becomes continuous, large, deep, free, luminous, more bright, more penetrating in what it reveals, until eventually you might have, through a series of sustained flashes, even the continuity retained. And this is how the intuitive consciousness develops, grows, rises more and more, becomes complete, until it enters a state in which it lives in the intuition. Now, where is the psychic knowledge in all this? It is the psychic being as us, which is evolving and developing the access to these gradations of consciousness and integrating them into its personality. So one could say, for example, while the psychic has the potential for all that, that has not yet been developed or evolved. So as we were in a semi-animal consciousness, we had the potential for the human intellect, which the psychic held. And because it was nudging, and pushing, it built and organized that potential in the surface mind and even lifted you to develop a more abstract power of intellect, free from the sense mind and the emotional mind. It was the push of the psychic which was forming and nudging you on. But the same thing, it leads you to the intuitive, but the actual descent of the intelligence is from above. The descent of the intuition is from above, and the psychic prepares the ground, opening and leading to it, and the two movements become complementary. The psychic preparing the base, the descending consciousness transforming and completing the change. The psychic alone is not capable of transforming. And when that descent takes place and there is a transformation, all this new gradation of consciousness being integrated becomes now the part of the substance and the personality of the psychic being, which it carries into the next life. So this is just to explain in vocabulary which whether it makes sense to you fully, but you'll see these two are complementary. If the higher knowledge descends and the psychic discrimination is not there, there will be tendencies for the mind to distort and you would not know the difference. When the psychic discrimination is there, it would immediately catch the distortion and refuse it. And so having the base of the psychic first is a huge help when the higher consciousness, knowledge, or whatever descends from above comes, for the receptivity as well as the pure, undiluted, unmixed reception and expression of it. If it is not there, the descending thing will not only get mixed, it may also experience revolts or reactions. So you understand, in their relationship, the psychic needs the higher to complete what it can begin. The higher needs the support of the psychic, but it is not essential if it needs to do, if it has to do what it has to do. So if you see in Sri Aurobindo's earlier writings, there was not so much stress on the psychic influence as the necessary base. The primary effort was through the descent that the transformation was taking place. And it was to prevent the distortions that he prioritized the emergence of the psychic later on in his writings, in the way he was formulating the yoga for the disciples. So this is maybe I share one more text of the letters where Sri Aurobindo writes. It's in the same collection of letters. He says, Ordinary human minds, Europeans especially, are accustomed to regard thought as indispensable and as the highest thing. So they are alarmed at silence. X, somebody, when he was here, asked for yoga. I told him how to make his mind silent, and it became silent. He immediately got frightened and said, I am becoming a fool, I can't think. So, Sri Aurobindo writes, so I took what I had given away from him. That is how the average mind regards silence. Now, I'm reading this for two reasons. Very interesting. First is, of course, it is along the lines of what we discussed, the silence as requirement. But more than that, it is the difference of approach in the education, which we dwelt upon last time quite a bit. Unfortunately, this mode of training of the intellect is now global. And the priority is for activity of mind and not training the mind to become silent. We understood how that works, so I won't repeat. But the second reason I wanted to share this, when Sri Aurobindo says, I told him how to make his mind silent and it became silent. See, I told him and it became. He doesn't say he made an effort and then it became. And then he completes when he had this reaction. So I took what I had given away from him. And here you understand how Sri Aurobindo would teach. When he told you do this, he would give the thing and the result would be imprinted in you. In the very act of speaking, writing, there was a transmission of experience. And if you were appropriately receptive, that's it. You just got the experience. And you could still have the illusion. You say, I made an effort and I got it so easily, not knowing that he imprinted. And your effort was needed only as a supporting base so that the imprint could happen. But also, very important suggestion here, because he gives, he can also take away that thing. How that happens is because what is given is substance of consciousness, substance of experience, and it can be withdrawn. So when he got this, his mind became silent. It was silent despite him. He was struggling to want to think. And then he said, I'm becoming a fool. I can't think, even though I'm trying. So there's the panic. And so he withdrew it. So this is interesting. There's another letter because I was looking for suitable quotations where the distinction between the upper and inner would be visible. I found a very interesting letter of Sri Aurobindo. It is dated 26th March 1926. So already the ashram, so the ashram at this point has not been formally established. The mother has not been put formally in charge of the sadhana of the sadhaks. Nevertheless, the transition has happened on an occult and spiritual level. So already Sri Aurobindo is, certain disciples who were in deep sadhana were directed to go to the mother and she would be guiding them. The change had begun. So March of 1926, and it was in November that finally the formal handover was made. So I'm reading from his letter, which is quite remarkable. He refers to himself as AG. So what happened was someone had drafted a letter. Sri Aurobindo rewrote entirely the letter, but he kept the language. So, dear friend, he writes, I have shown your letter to AG. Now, Sri Aurobindo is rewriting as if coming from this other person. And below I give you his answer to it. So he says that you had certain intuitions, you're quite right, etc. Then he says, your intuition that in your case, the effective impulse can best come from Meera, from the mother. And then bracket he writes, you can call her Meera Devi if you like, but please don't call her Madam! Exclamation. You must have said Madam or Madam Meera. So your intuition is also perfectly correct. When she saw you from the window on the terrace on your last visit, she herself said to AG, Sri Aurobindo is writing this, she herself said to AG, Aurobindo Ghosh, so himself, this is a man I can change, but he is not yet ready. So mother is seeing this man, she recognizes the capacity the man has and she knows she can, but he is not ready. But it was your mind that interfered when you thought it was necessary to sit in meditation with her in order to receive what she has to give. So the guy thinks, unless I sit in meditation with her, I won't get. Sri Aurobindo explains now. There is no such condition for her spiritual or psychic action and influence. So when the mother wants to give you an experience, she wants to act in you spiritually or psychically, you don't have to be sitting with her in meditation. You just have to be open and she does it. So he explains this. It is true that she was not mixing with the sadhaks at that time, partly because they themselves were not ready to take the right relation and receive her influence. Partly because the difficulties of the physical plane made it necessary for her to retire from all direct contact with anyone, as distinct from an indirect contact through AG. So, in order to maintain whatever she needed to protect herself physically, she was helping through Sri Aurobindo. Very interesting. Now, normally we're used to Sri Aurobindo's force flowing through the mother, and she's saying she kept indirect contact through Sri Aurobindo. And also because partly the sadhaks were not ready to take the right relation and receive her influence. So many still saw the mother as just one of the sadhaks, maybe an advanced sadhaka, not as the mother, not as Shakti of Sri Aurobindo. So the right relation was not set. That was set formally in when Sri Aurobindo announced the formation of the ashram and put the mother in charge, 24th of November 1926, of which just 1 year from now, we will have the first centenary. So, always, however, she was acting with him, with Sri Aurobindo, on the psychic and vital levels to do whatever might be possible at the time. So, what's required from you to receive? All that is needed to receive a direct touch from her is to take the right relation to her, to be open, and to enter her atmosphere. The most ordinary meeting or talk with her on the physical plane is quite enough for the purpose. Only the sadhaka must be ready. Otherwise, he may not receive the impulse or may not be able to fulfill it or bear its pressure. So you see the value of this letter. You approach the mother. You have to enter her atmosphere to be open. This is required. And the right relation of receptive opening. And then you can have an ordinary meeting or talk, even casually if needed. That's enough for her to do her work in you. Nothing more is required from you. So you must be ready. Otherwise, when she puts in you whatever or the change she makes, he may not be ready to receive the impulse, may not be able to fulfill, or may not be able to bear its pressure. These are the three kinds of defect that would be there. Also, he says, it will be a mistake if you make too rigid a separation between AG and Mira, between Sri Aurobindo and the mother. Both influences are necessary for the complete development of the sadhana. The work of the two together can alone bring down the supramental truth into the physical plane. Now he explains the difference of how the two work. This is so amazing, this letter. It's one of those letters which is totally unknown and not valued for what it is. So he explains, AG acts directly on the mental and the vital being through the illumined mind. He represents the Purusha element whose strength is predominantly in illumined, intuitive, supramental or spiritual knowledge. So by illumined knowledge, he wants to say intuitive, supramental or spiritual knowledge. And the power that acts in this knowledge. So that is Sri Aurobindo working on the sadhaka. While the psychic being supports this action and helps to transform the physical and vital plane. So you're seeing two actions. And then what is the mother's work? Meera acts directly on the psychic being and on the emotional, vital, and physical nature through the illumined psychic consciousness. While the illumined intuitions from the supramental being give her the necessary knowledge to act on the right lines and at the right moment. Fascinating. Sri Aurobindo is being described as operating from the higher illumined consciousness, illumined knowledge, and then the psychic being behind supports. The mother is described as working directly on the psychic being and through it on the emotional, vital, physical natures, with the illumined intuitions from the supramental giving the necessary knowledge to act in the right lines. You see the way the two were working and the complementarity of their working, and then the key importance, the necessity of this complementary working for the most rapid result and to bring down the supramental truth into the physical plane. But the letter continues. Her force of the mother, representing the Shakti element, is directly psychic, vital, physical, and her spiritual knowledge is predominantly practical in its nature. So when he says predominantly, you have to be careful. It's not just that. She has that full access to the higher, but she takes the stance of its primarily practical operation. Sri Aurobindo takes the stance of its primary knowledge, experience, action, and the two form the bridge, the link, which makes possible this fixing of the higher consciousness and the inner consciousness in the material world. It is, that is to say, a large and detailed knowledge and experience of the mental, vital, and physical forces at play. This is in the mother's work. Large and detailed knowledge and experience. And with the knowledge, the power, the power to handle them for the purposes of life and of yoga. So she is bringing the knowledge, but also the power to be able to do this. It's quite a remarkable letter, isn't it? And then he speaks specifically of this person. I'll read the whole thing. It's worthwhile. In your case, and this is regarding the person Daulat Ram Sharma. In your case, what is strong in your nature is especially the dynamic mind, the vital force, and the practical physical mind. The thinking mind in you, in spite of the interest it has taken in religion and philosophy, is not easily open to a true illumination. The other parts mentioned above could more easily accept the light, but they cannot find it for themselves because their whole strength and activity has been turned outwards. So you see, this man has a thinking mind with interest in religion and philosophy, but not open to true illumination. He has a dynamic mind, the part of the mind which is turning to action, vital force, practical physical mind. So he's probably a businessman or something in that direction. So those parts could not find the inner truth because they are too much turned outward. So what's the correction? It is only the psychic being in you that has from time to time been giving you intuitions and turning you towards the truth. But it could not come forward and lead your life because you have too much suppressed your emotional nature, dried up your surface mind, and choked up with much rubbish the psychic fire. You see, this is like an X-ray analysis of a person's all the levels and parts of consciousness. But this is the way Sri Aurobindo and the mother dealt with the sadhakas. They looked, they saw exactly what were the things, what were strengths, weaknesses, things coming in the way, and then intervened as required in the best way possible. So I'm sorry for the interruption in my comments, but I go back to the text. So it could not come forward because of, let's read this again because it will apply to a lot of us. It could not come forward and lead your life because you have too much suppressed your emotional nature, dried up your surface mind, and choked up with much rubbish the psychic fire. If once it can awaken entirely and come in front, it can transform the dynamic mental, the vital, and the physical mind, and through them make you an illumined instrument for the physical realization of the truth upon earth. So in this case of this person, Daulat Sharma, this is how it would work. It will take the stronger parts of his nature, the parts which are more open to receiving the higher truth, and turn them into powerful instruments. Then he says, this, as you can see from what has been said above about Mira's force, makes your nature one which is specially meant for the kind of work she can best do. So when Sri Aurobindo and the mother have taken these complementary poises, And when a disciple comes who is more suited for this action or that, naturally among them, they would direct the disciple more towards that particular kind of intervention. Or to put it in other terms, a disciple would feel a stronger affinity to either the mother or Sri Aurobindo in the working of the sadhana of the yoga force, depending on the particular alignment of his nature and the parts which were most open. You understand why all of us have a natural inclination, attraction, or preference in the contact to one or both. Naturally, though, as that contact deepens enough, we discover that there is no distinction between the two and they are both together in the same one consciousness. So I skip some more portion of the letter where he speaks of brahmacharya and other things. And then, now since you have these intuitions, why not act on them? So his intuition was that he needed to open to the mother. Why not try, even from a distance, to open yourself to receive any influence which may come to you by the mere fact of your having turned towards Meera and her knowing it? If nothing else happens, the necessary psychic preparation may take place. So far, your preparation has been only mental. So the psychic preparation will begin if you open to the mother like this, even from a distance. So it's a letter being sent. He's living in another city. And then Sri Aurobindo writes, at least you could try it. Only do keep your mind quiet, not silent or blank. See, this is a problem people have. I can't make my mind silent. I can't make it blank. No, you just need to be quiet. So keep your mind quiet, but put outside you. Look at the thoughts if they rise, but wait for a higher truth, for the psychic being to come forward, for the psychic intuition to speak, and when it comes, do not let the mind meddle. If there is something not quite clear, wait for more light. Give your soul a chance. That is what is needed. So it's one of those amazing letters, but very helpful for all of us in our own sadhana, isn't it? So I think it's a pretty longish response to Pascal's question, but an important distinction to be made. Rumpel commented in the chat box last time, Shruti sounds more like a flash of insight and Drishti is a more sustained knowledge. Yes, there's a difference. So if we look back at the three words, intuition, which was smriti as a remembrance, inspiration, which is in the nature of the hearing, Shruti, and the revelation, which is in the nature of a seeing and a knowing, which is more complete, you'll see a natural sequence in terms of completeness. I gave the example, you have an object with your eyes closed, you touch, you feel it, you know it intimately in the contact. So you hold and you can feel its texture, its substantiality. And then, as if out of it, further knowledge emerges in its rhythms, in its vibrational quality, and it grows from there to become more complete. And you know, the way it unfolds, it works out, it flows. And that's the sense of the intuition, inspiration which flows. And then as your eyes begin to open, you're not only touching and hearing, as your eyes begin to open, using the analogy, you see it not only from outside but inside out. You're one with it in the seeing, and that becomes the revelation, the drishti. So you could describe them as 3 degrees of deepening of the divine knowledge and the divine way of knowing, jnana. So that's the reason why we have these 3 distinctions. In the chat box last time, CDMG had made a comment. I only read a portion. I missed the other 2. He said, in my experience, academic research is done by first having intuition or foresight of the result, and then verifying it or justifying it with intellectual processes. And perhaps those that did this extremely well included people, Tesla and Ramanujan, who would simply close their eyes and see the result and note it down. I used to assume that we were supposed to pick a random situation and investigate, and experiment on almost blindly, hoping to find something interesting. It is not actually that blind, I think. Yes, in fact, it would be a huge mistake to try out random situations and grope blindly. You would simply remain blind, never know. Always, always, without exception, any scientist who has done anything useful begins with an insight, which is an intuition. However partial, however distorted, it is still an intuition. Something felt, it feels like this could be it, or this is it. Let me verify. And you make the effort. So if you don't have an intuition and you start simply blindly experimenting, nothing happens. Now, you see, one of the theories, because science starts with your knowledge coming from the brain, one of the theories is that, well, you keep trying, eventually you hit something, and then you make a great discovery. So when they look at knowledge which is very precise, for example, one just thing which comes to mind in Ayurveda, you have precise knowledge of herbal effects of different herbs or vegetables or any foods. Sometimes so advanced, so precise that modern technology is validating today in ways that there was no way we could validate before. So, for example, a certain peptide is found to rejuvenate the cells, or some particular content of the plant is anti-inflammatory in a dramatic way, or a cancer cure. And we have always used it in Ayurveda. And modern science says, hey, why is that plant so effective? Let's double check. And it finds, oh, there's this molecule. Now we have explained it. We know better than Ayurveda. No, you knew nothing. Ayurveda showed you this works and you validated by isolating the component which seems to make it work. You had no way of knowing it was there. But the error they make is to say, oh, those Ayurvedic physicians, they must have tried out thousands of plants and tried everything possible and compiled all their knowledge. It is absolutely wrong. The greatest rishis were those who had the intuition. You remember Mother's experience when in Japan, she went to the plants in her kitchen garden and she took the plants in her hand, and the plants would reveal to her what was their medicinal use. And sometimes the vegetables would say, I'm ready to be plucked. Some would say, I'm not ready, etc. So it was in a house. For many years, we could go and see the house from outside. The person who owned it was a doctor in Kyoto. He lived in Tokyo, but the house was in Kyoto. And for many years, we could go. I had taken photos. And unfortunately, last year, I came to know that the house has been demolished to make a huge, I don't know, some hotel or some building. Many people had tried to buy it and the man had refused to sell. It's unfortunately been destroyed now. But that's where the mother had these experiences which she has documented. But that's how the rishis knew. They touched or they held the plant and all the knowledge necessary was given. And yes, they compiled, if you want to say, but not in this way. So modern scientists, similarly, when they are successful, they go by an insight first and then verify or justify by intellectual or other processes. The difference with Tesla and Ramanujan was because, yes, they already had the insight and they could rapidly move into the validation. Sometimes they knew exactly what needed to be done, even to make materially organized. But you'll see how this works. It's a good example of how intuition needs to flow as if through channels. When it wants to articulate itself, it needs to find the right forms and vehicles. So in speech, when the intuition flows in poetry, it picks up the word from your store. And sometimes it may happen that a word is picked up that you had perhaps read 30, 40 years ago. You had even forgotten that the word exists, and it pulls it out from your store and puts it in the right place, and you know exactly what it means and it's the right word. It reveals the meaning of the word even. And you've never looked at a dictionary to be sure. Afterwards, you might check, yes, it actually fits, it works. So it can pull like this, it can draw material and assemble it for you, but the same thing happens on a physical level. So when Tesla, for example, created his AC motor, the common thinking among electricians was alternating current goes positive, negative, positive, flips direction. So on the average, it should be zero. it is unusable. It is a useless current. That was a theory then. So everybody went for direct current where you kept flowing in one direction only. Tesla had this intuition, and he describes the vision. He saw the rotating three-phase rotating field in a vision, and he knew this is how he would make the AC motor, that you had to rotate the three phases. From at that point, he did not have the equipment to make the motors. He had this while he was in Europe. He goes to the United States. He's looking for the money or the opportunity to make things. He has no money. So he starts digging holes in the road to earn money. Then he becomes an assistant to the man who was promoting DC, repairs things for him, earns a little money. Eventually, he breaks away, starts his own laboratory, and there he has the necessary resources to make his AC motor. And then there's an incident where he's announced that he's making an AC motor, and somebody asks him casually, "Well, how's your AC motor coming up?" He says, "In my head, I've already built it. I'm now testing it in my head." So when he's testing in the head, he sees what are the issues. He's making those corrections. And when finally the whole thing is done, he goes to his lab, assembles the pieces, puts it all together. Now it's only an engineering problem. He puts it together and it's done. That requires a very high level of preparation from the intuition through the intellect and all the way down to the most material specific engineering knowledge, which is assembled to put together the final thing. It is actually outstanding the kind of work he did, which even today, when you look back and you say, how could he have known this? He didn't seem to have made 100 experiments. He finds the optimum arrangement. For example, when he makes the AC current 60 hertz, as in America, for 60 hertz, the voltage had to be 110. And he gives a whole logic around this. But if you want to save on copper, then you go for a higher voltage, 220 volts, as in Europe or in India, for which the frequency has to drop to 50 hertz to keep the resonance in the ether appropriate for maximum efficiency. Now, in his mind, he's seeing this, and he's seeing literally the way the modern world of electricity is going to be built up for humanity. And he's able to articulate these two modes, these two optimizations, which literally define the electrical age for the next 150 years. It's amazing. And it comes only from this precise, clear intuition all the way down to the engineering training that he has. Okay, so that was. There are a few more questions. Maybe we go to Maya's question. Sri Aurobindo and the mother had mentioned that most of human history has been recorded inaccurately. Stories of war, triumph, and conquest are often written by victors. When we read Sri Aurobindo's literature, especially some of his poems such as Baji Prabhu or Ilian, we feel through his powerful narration the vivid truth of these historical events. From where does this knowledge come? And how can we too know things without physically needing to verify? So Baji Prabhu, for those who might not know, is one of those critical transitions in Indian history where the future of India was protected by a group of people holding a pass until the rest of the army could withdraw and not lose. Hold back the Islamic invaders at that critical pass. They all died. But the poem that is so poignantly describes this whole thing. It's moving to the core. But when you read it, you feel yourself pulled into that condition. Even the heat of the sun beating and the struggle and the fierceness of the battle, everything is literally formed in you as you read the poem. It's so moving. It's so intensely powerful. How can words lead you into such a powerful experience? And the experience itself is so convincing, you know this is how it happened. So there are two elements here. One is the knowledge itself of what happened, and then this ability to transmit the power of the experience through words in this inspired poetry form. so that someone else can experience the truth of what was seen by Sri Aurobindo. And the same thing you see in a poem like Ilion, which is again a transition point in history in Troy, where you are moving from the age of intuition to the age of reason, where a higher is falling to give way to a lower, lesser. The Greeks shared with the seas as almost barbaric in face of what Troy held, and the transition preparing for the Kali Yuga in that sense, in its most intense form. But it's again a transition point, and what's held, what is lost, and it's all captured in that experience. It's also the end of the age of heroes. So all these things he's articulated in a way that today, as we read, we can relive that experience. How did he have that? Well, it comes from the jnana. What we read last time, what we will now continue to read. By the consciousness of jnana, which originates or begins with the lower working of the intuition and opens out all the way to the supramental consciousness, you have complete knowledge of whatever you choose. And to this extent, even on the practical details. Now, there's a specific distinction Sri Aurobindo has, which may not apply to us. Yes, you can have this knowledge also. But in Sri Aurobindo's case, the knowledge of these events was also drawn because at those critical junctures of human history, Sri Aurobindo was present. He was the presiding consciousness which held that heroism, that courage. Which gave these heroes the strength to achieve the impossible, to hold in his grip that transition of human fate, human destiny, human history. These things are seen from the higher levels. They're thrown when a series of events converges to a critical transition. One sees from the higher poise of consciousness in advance where it's happening, what form it will take, what are the possibilities. That's all comes with the jnana. What are the possibilities of outcome? And you see Sri Aurobindo describing all this in his ideal of human unity or the human cycle, or in his poetry. And at that point, the divine forces converge equally to assist that transition and to protect the fate and direct it in the direction which will ensure the possibility of a greater future and not have it all lost. So one such intervention took place during what Sri Aurobindo refers to as the Great War, what we call the Second World War and the First World War in Europe. But they were through Europe impacting the world, and the fate of the world was held in the balance. And Sri Aurobindo intervened there equally while he was in the body. In other cases, he may or may not have incarnated in the same way. There might have been an emanation of him which was present in some of these cases. Otherwise, simply the dominating presence of his consciousness infused into the individuals who, in that moment, became lifted to the poise of an emanation. The mother recalls the experience, she says, of the experience of Joan of Arc. When she felt lifted by the surge of the spiritual force working through her to accomplish those miraculous interventions. So mother remembers this because it was her consciousness flowing into her, into Joan of Arc. She was present. In a sense, she embodied herself in the force that incarnated in Joan of Arc. And then there were times when it withdrew, and she was then an ordinary woman. But the consciousness which infused was the mother. So she remembered those moments. Not that she would remember the whole story of Joan of Arc, because it was not her. So these are complex realities which we tend to want to reduce to, oh yes, so and so is incarnation of. It's not so simple. There are these partial infusions which take place in emanations and states sometimes for a period. When the best vehicle is found for that work, it is used. So in this case, Many of these are remembered by Sri Aurobindo and the mother because they were present. So it is there, in a sense, held in their personal memory, uh, but also they are available beyond what was there in their personal memory for all of us even to be able to access by such means. So, another question from Maya is, in one of your talks, you mentioned that when your gifted maths teacher passed away, your dream experience where you met him and asked him if he could pour his knowledge into you, like Kapali Shastri once poured his knowledge of Sanskrit into the mother. How is knowledge transmitted in this way from teacher to student without any outward instruction? Is it by giving them an experience and thus knowledge through identity? How does the student make themselves receptive to such specific transmission of knowledge? So I'll repeat this incidents for those who might not know. This is an incident which took place after my teacher's teacher, Kapali Shastriyar, had left his body. And a few years later, when the mother was working on the cellular consciousness and the transformation of her cells in the body, she found that a certain rhythmic repetition in the physical consciousness was helpful for the cells. So while she was watching a movie with the children, it was a religious movie, and there is the chant of Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. She found the phrasing Om Namo Bhagavate resonating in her cells, on which she was working for their supramental transformation. So while the chant is being done in the cinema, she finds the cells unusually responding to that. So she took that phrase, just Om Namo Bhagavate, and repeated that, not just in phrasing, in the body consciousness. So if you see, I've spoken about this before, I won't repeat. It's not speech repetition. She's talking to people. It's not like a mantra as people do, blah, 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 moving lips or tongue. It is a repetition in the consciousness of the body, in the cells. And she found that very helpful for the cells. So at that point, Kapali Shastriyar saw that she was interested in the use of mantra and the knowledge of mantra. So he was in the subtle body at that point, not yet having incarnated. So he approached her and said, well, I see that you're interested in this. Would you like to have my knowledge? So mother says yes. And then mother described to Panditji how she said, I opened my mind and he poured all his knowledge into me. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that so simple? You see, we intuitively feel that this should be possible. So a lot of human intuitions are articulated in cinema or in science fiction. For example, in this movie, which is called The Matrix, you have this person who is inside the Matrix and he doesn't know how to fly a helicopter. He phones up the person who's outside the Matrix. He says, download the knowledge, and he receives the knowledge, and then he has within him the capacity to fly the helicopter. So there, of course, it's explained in terms of software and so on. But here, this is the reality, especially when it deals with knowledge of this kind, which is knowledge that is experience. It's not mental knowledge, which is words and ideas of an experience. It's not the experience itself. But when you are dealing with jnana, it is knowledge that is held as experience. So when it fills you, it brings into you the capacity naturally. So this becomes you remember the three facets of jnana, which is the mental knowledge, the second is the experience knowledge, and the third is it flowing into action and right action. So when the three facets are developed, as the knowledge flows into you, it becomes right action effortlessly and perfectly, to the extent that, well, your vehicle, machinery, biology, etc. can convey. But in this way, one can acquire any specific knowledge from above, sometimes with very precise capacities. Much depends on, when you translate to the biology, much depends on the biology's receptivity and flexibility. But assuming it is there, if you have a trained body consciousness, it goes all the way to the physical. And so much of what the mother used to herself express came from that. So much of what she transmitted to others was similarly infused. So if you go back to the letter we read earlier to that Dr. Daulat Sharma, we find Sri Aurobindo writing to him, when you open yourself and she will put into you that thing. Or the example Sri Aurobindo gave of putting the silence of mind into this person. So they can infuse into you, and then, assuming now your body is not perfectly receptive, which obviously none of us have, with a little bit of effort, suddenly you find the capacity awakening and flowing in you, and you're able to do pretty much whatever it was that was required. Go back to the example which I've often quoted of Romain, who after coming here as a young boy, suddenly flowers out into poetry, in music and literature. He would play the sitar, the tabla, I don't know if there was another instrument, and he would sing. Within 2 years, he has developed proficiency in all these suddenly. And Sri Aurobindo points to that and says to Nirod that this is an example of what the yoga force can do. But what happened? So Sri Aurobindo infuses into him the yoga force, but also seeing in him the potential. Now you've seen how they mapped out a person's capacities, weaknesses, and strengths. It's actually much more. They would also see the lives from the past, the potential for the future, the soul's aspiration for this particular life. And knowing all this, they would infuse the nudge, the push, the capacity as much as necessary. So, seeing this potential in him, he would infuse that capacity, and then the man makes a little bit of effort. He's inspired, he makes a little bit of effort, and just starts flowing out. That's how it works. So, how is this relevant for us? If Sri Aurobindo could do that with Romain Palit, he can do that with you, with all of us. The Divine Mother is everywhere. She can do that with all of us. So the question really is, do you open yourself to receive what she can give you? Or do you start with the assumption, oh, it's going to take me 3 years of intense effort to develop such and such a skill? This is the big difference between the Occidental educational framework and the ancient Indian educational framework. You've been programmed to think in terms of incapacity and slow graded development of capacities in a very indirect process. We've been programmed. That's the only way it can happen. No, it's not. Once you understand this, what do you do then to make it different? I will say, please train your physical also. But let your faith be not dependent on this. The faith is a critical element. The faith is the part in you which will open to the higher with the clear conviction that it is the higher which predominates the lower. And while you train the lower, the focus of training the lower is to make it conscious and supple and receptive. That's all. Not worry about the skill in itself. Yes, while you train conscious to make it conscious and open and receptive, you will train it in the direction of the skill required. So if you're going to play a musical instrument, you will move your fingers along, but with the intention of making them conscious, receptive, and open, etc. But on the other side, you will turn your whole consciousness to receiving the help from above, increasingly in the grade of the character of jnana, to use a more modern vocabulary, intuition. But intuition, you have to understand what it is not merely informational knowledge. Intuition is substance of experience. So what descends is substance. It's a living experience, and the force of that living experience fills you, seeps into you, all the way into your fingers. And now you find your fingers spontaneously moving to do what they need to do. Of course, that comes at the end, but in between, you'll have something linking the two. So the intuition comes, it begins to form something, and then I have to participate with consciously, oh, I know I have to do it this way, and I actively nudge my fingers to do correctly. So there is a participation of your effort aligned to what the intuition is forming in you. and completing the missing part where there's a resistance. So I'm going into somewhat detail, but if you get the hang of this, you can in principle develop any capacity, any skill very rapidly, so rapidly that by conventional means it would be considered impossible or unusual, or they will simply say you are gifted. That's all. Gift means nothing, it explains nothing, but it's true, it's a gift. You received the gift from above. You were gifted. You were not born gifted, you were given a gift because you asked for it and you opened to receive it. So if you remember the wording of Sri Aurobindo's letter to Sharma, Daulat Ram Sharma, he says that if you didn't do this, you would not have been so. You would not have been able to hold. There are three things he said. Seeing if I can find the text again. Or you may not receive the impulse, may not be able to fulfill it, or may not be able to bear its pressure. These are the three things. So the third particularly is interesting because there's a push. Whenever there's a help, something is infused, it's pushing you. And if it is strong, then you find it yourself overwhelmed. But if you're open and receptive, then you feel the infusion, but you don't feel it too intense. It's not unsupportable. But you may not be able to receive, or you may not be able to fulfill what is working through you. But if you put yourself in the right state, then you have all these three easily done. And so that gives you the base generally for how you can acquire such very precise knowledge and capacity. So what will happen? Let's say if it was in the example of mathematics, if you said, okay, I want to develop this particular capacity of mathematics, and you open in this way, assuming you've already got a certain receptivity in that grade of mind used for mathematics, then after receiving that, as you will open a mathematics book or take up a mathematics problem that you want to solve, you'll find the ideas streaming, lighting up, spontaneously flowing like a poem. Oh, oh my God, a series of insights. And you're busy trying to articulate and put it in the vocabulary that the mathematics has. Or you're reading a book and you read it like a novel and you say, wow, this makes so much sense. Oh yeah, this is obvious. This is inevitable. And obviously there has to be this much as a consequence and that consequence, which is not yet in the book. Or which comes later in the book, where the guy says, this is advanced. No, but this was obvious to me. That's how it works. It flows through the working of your existing mind, making it smooth, lit up, spontaneous, effortless. And you will say, I have become more intelligent. I am becoming more capable. I am understanding. I am so intelligent, etc. So I think that answers the question enough. So in principle, you could gain any capacity, not just in knowledge, but also in action and skills even of games, instruments, etc. The last question from Maya will take, because it's all directly related to our topic, so it's worthwhile. I had read an old article in on the ashram atmosphere where an old sadhak described the quality of a dense, pregnant, and creative silence that pervaded the ashram in the early days. We have felt this during certain moments too, in the presence of their rooms or other sacred spaces. And then she writes, it is the creative silence that reveals. Yet, the conscious austerity of speech that Mother spoke about in the 4 austerities and 4 liberations, that's an article of the Mother, seems to be often swept under the carpet these days. Sri Aurobindo said that it is the inner silence which matters more, and that one should be able to meditate on a battlefield. But to a certain extent, isn't the discipline of outer silence necessary before inner silence is established? So that's the first question. Second, what role does silence in all its forms have on initially the pursuit of knowledge and understanding, and ultimately the realization and transformation? So it's about silence. inner and outer. So the question really is, don't we have to have the outer in order to have the inner? So the difficult process would be when you start by silencing your speech, and then you suddenly find your mind is so active with all kinds of thoughts, and then you try to silence your mind. That's the way you've been programmed by the Occidental educational system to go from outside in. That's the difficult way. And yes, of course, you should do that. It's good training, and it will help you to value the easier way. And the easier way is from the inside out. And in the inside out experience, you receive the descent of the peace from above. And when it fills your mind, when it fills your emotions, when it fills your life energies, when it fills your nervous system physically, automatically all these become very quiet and very still. Automatically, no other effort on your part. Your effort only to receive and hold the peace that descends. How to do that? You might find helpful the exercise which is shared on the YouTube channel, which is called guided meditation for descent of peace. Basically, you concentrate above head, feel the space, not the physical space, but the inner space, where you'll feel very quickly a dense presence, which is a dense peace. It is an aspect of the self. You feel that until it grows dense, and then slowly you bring it into you. Now, when it fills the mind, automatically your mind becomes still, silent. Unlike silence, the state of peace allows you to think if you want, but naturally you are effortlessly in silence. From there, external speech may stay in silence or not is irrelevant, because you already have the inner silence. So if you want to establish inner silence, this is a much easier way. By allowing the place within you, which is already in deep silence or peace, to come forward or to descend in you, it brings into you already the gift of what you're seeking. In the integral yoga, always the descent from above and the emergence from below, from within, are the two most powerful means of any realization, instead of you struggling from outside in. But when that happens, now you have the inner silence, let's say, and subsequently outer partial or other silence. That's not enough. You want to have this higher knowledge, ultimately a realization. Well, then from that silence or in that state of silence, you have to turn up and open to the knowledge, experience, jnana, which descends from above, which will then find in the silence a receptive base. So there'll be other factors. The silence itself has to become not only deep and still, it should, your mind, your substance of emotions, life energies, even body, should become habituated to being suffused with the silence, with the peace, and to being in a state of receptivity for whatever duration. So one of the requirements for development of intuition, the first requirement is to be able to quiet your mind and remain in quietness as long as you need to. Anytime, at will. Develop this using the descent of the peace, and you're ready for the next steps of the intuition. The next step would be, as going back to the question of Pascal, shift your consciousness inward, because the descent of the higher knowledge takes place in the inner layers in your subtle body first, not in the outer layers of mind. So shift in would be second step. Third step, shift up, because the center above head is closer to the intuitive mind than to the rational or lower ranges of mind. So shift the poise of thought to above head poise. From there, you can open and easily connect to the intuitive consciousness. But you will notice again, with the silence or the peace filling you, this inward shift becomes almost automatic. A general turning upward would be easy, but even if you don't shift consciousness all the way up, you will turn up and feel, become aware of what is above, and then be able to receive its influence more directly. If you fulfill these three conditions, then already in a receptive stillness, silence, open to the mother, she flows, she fills, she gives you the experience and infuses into you the experience or the knowledge or the capacity, skill, whatever is required. You may conceive of her not necessarily as the mother's presence, but just the knowledge and the presence of the self, if that is more natural for you. But either way, it comes and descends into you from there. So this would be the most direct way, not only to gain the knowledge, but also in jnana, the experience of the thing as it enters, and that settling into you more and more permanently becomes a realization, and so on. So these questions are all related to what we are studying, and especially to its practical aspect. There is one question of Revati. How can mathematics be perceived in the context of divine knowledge? How can the latter be used to improve mathematics skills? The character of math seems to be synonymous with that of divine infinite. That's the question. So, generally speaking, all that we have described would apply to amplifying your mind's capacity to perceive and acquire knowledge in any field, equally in mathematics. So, you want to develop your skills, what we discussed is comprehensive enough. But there's this question in the context of divine knowledge, what is the place of mathematics? Now, there's a very interesting observation of the mother that she makes, that there's a particular zone in the mind, in the worlds of mind, there's a particular zone where you find mathematics and music. They are both in worlds of the mind consciousness, because both of them relate to relationships or harmonies of the divine consciousness received in the mind's forms. Now, this goes quite deep. I've touched upon it in some discussions on numbers and maths in some previous talks. So I don't go fully into it. But just the basic idea, if you go deep into what a number means, freeing it from its representation in symbols, what is number 12, for example? Don't look at 1 and 2. This whole game which people make of adding up digits and building numbers out of it, it's nice, it's very superficial. There's something much more deep in the sense that 12 carries. And in the sense that it carries, it has already an implicit relationship with other numbers. 12, for example, is multiple of 3 and 4. 4 is multiple of 2 relating to itself. What is 2? What is 3? What is 12? And there's an implicit deep relationship which, if you go into the intuitive experience behind the numbers, you'll find it relates to a truth which is already present in the divine consciousness. And the relationships of the numbers as if represent those relationships of the divine consciousness here in symbols in the mind. Because 12 of what? It has no physical value, it has no vital value, it has a purely mental abstraction. Even it's not a mental thing purely, because if you say what is 12, 12 what? There's no meaning to it. It's an abstraction, it's embedding in the mental world something which representing something which exists above mental world in an intuitive or even a supramental domain. And so these are like hooks, tail ends of something which is higher, superconscious to us. And you can catch those hooks and play with them, rearrange them, relate with them, and as if replicate here truths which belong higher up. And this is where you get those very interesting, quite amazing relationships of numbers, including transcendental numbers, pi, ratio of circumference of a circle divided by its diameter. It gives pi. And the number is so strange, so unusual, it can never be represented by any limiting symbol. It is inherently infinite, even in its ability to be represented. Why is the universe like that? And you can already feel it is like that, but it's a truth which goes above your ability to mentally formulate. And all these, and that was the original sense of the sense of sacredness of numbers, that they were as if little bits hanging from something which exists in the higher worlds, and you're catching the tail end and kind of pulling ropes and playing with triggering those things. That was the idea. You tie these ropes in a particular way here, and you have as if created a link to things, modified things on the higher ranges. That was the idea. So yes, there is something which is very interesting with mathematics, but exactly the same thing with music. The melody of a music and the sequencing of the notes and chords and combinations, sometimes with the rhythms also, are representations in the mental world of something, the harmony of which is in a higher range. And to experience the harmony in itself in that domain is an overwhelmingly beautiful experience. Very difficult, almost impossible to translate in mental terms. But to the extent that you have a musical note and the relationships of notes, they are capturing something of that. You have the basis for the human expression in music. So if you take a particular frequency starting point, that's your base, and you take the other frequencies, do, re, mi, fa, so, sa, re, ga, ma, pa, what makes this in tune or out of tune? And of course, they will tell you, it's a mathematical relationship. No, you're not thinking maths. You put the next note off slightly one way or other, and it feels dissonant. When it comes to the right frequency, it feels harmonious. So it's as if there's something behind in which the harmony is already held, and when you articulate the note, you're catching the harmony or missing it. And it's most painful when you're missing it slightly, because you can feel the truth of it and yet it's distorted. So you're taking a truth and perverting it. And it's painful. If you go well off, then you've lost the truth anyway. It's not so painful. Interesting, isn't it? So even in music, we are actually attempting to represent through these relationships of sounds something which already exists. We're feeling the thing which exists in their symbols. And you see why it's very similar to mathematics. And you see why, of course, those numbers have mathematical relations. Because they're representations of those implicit harmonies up there. So you can say, yes, there is a mathematical relation. But all those relationships, interestingly, of the correct notes of the octave, all those relationships are transcendental numbers or perfect ratios. But key will be a transcendental number somewhere from which you derive perfect ratios. Why? Because that's the nature of the reality beyond that you're capturing. And so music, mathematics, both are interlinked quite deeply. Unlike mathematics, though, music, because it plays combinations of chords, is able to capture something much more rich, much more powerful and flexible in what it transmits. And unlike music, mathematics is able to capture something which has an enormous precision and complex relationships that are impossible to replicate in music. Or if you try to replicate in music, we don't have the instruments to be able to. For example, you can represent the pi ratio of this transcendental number ratio of the perimeter by diameter in an infinite series. 1 divided by something, which is 1 divided by something, which is 1 divided by something, and so on. And there are multiple series, not just one. There are innumerable types of series, all of which lead to pi, all of which are approaching pi the more you continue to calculate infinitely, but they never reach because you never reach infinity. But you can mathematically show that they converge on pi. Some converge rapidly, some converge slowly, some converge in a particular way, some converge in a different way. There are families of such series of infinities. I mean, it is something so amazing. You're feeling a truth behind what does this infinite series represent. You're feeling the truth of it, but your mind, as if touches it and then falls back. It's trying to seize and it slips through the fingers. But you feel it. Hold that. That's the intuitive perception you have. You have an intuitive perception. This series converges rapidly. That series converges slowly. What does it even mean? And if you stop thinking and feel what that means, you catch a truth of a certain character of the divine consciousness and the approach to it in this way or that way. These are various relationships the divine holds with itself. But with mathematics, you can capture with a level of precision, of detail and complexity that in music would be difficult to represent. So there are very different approaches. And you could even ask, well, what's the difference essentially? And it would again go to something which is transcending your mind's capacity. So if I hope that more than answers Revati's question. I'm tempted to take another question since we are in the mood for this sort of thing. Maureen asks, what is the relationship between space, time, and the development of the intuitive state of consciousness that absorbs the supramental Trikala Drishti? Form seems to manifest in space and it sustains itself in space for a duration, time. Space also contains forces. All we seem to imagine is that space is a sort of infinite container. That's our visual of space. So how does space affect consciousness? Perhaps this is a question for the future. The question itself is a bit abstract. She's putting it in the context of our discussion of Trikala Drishti, space, time, and because in Trikala Drishti you're seeing, so to say, the future or the past, and the convergence of circumstances to a particular outcome or not. What does it mean then? What is this thing called space in which all this is happening? What is this thing called time into which all these events are unfolding? So I think the question is more in that direction from the experience of the supramental Trikala Drishti. If you go back to the description of that, you will remember the divine creative consciousness which holds all possibilities in itself. Then it holds a station in which all these possibilities are held back. Certain possibilities are brought forward, and then they are as if developed and unfolding in time. And then there are the moments in the lowest poise with all that behind held. So in the lowest level, you have the moment in which all possibilities are trying to crowd into that moment as if competing forces, and each moment has patterns of competing forces. So that's where the question is coming from. The space has forces, and form manifests in space in a duration of time. But from the higher perspective of supramental consciousness, think of it this way. Everything that can be and everything that is, everything that was, are all simultaneously present in the totality of Brahman. They are right here, right now. There's no space-time. They're all independently, uniquely, individually existent in and as Brahman. And then there is a poise the Brahman takes where it puts some of these things in relation with each other. And once that relation is set, there is an inevitable unfoldment of that relationship in sequencing in the next poise of the Brahman. So, a flower grows out of a branch of a tree. Tree grows out of the soil of a mountain. A relationship has been set. Now, wherever mountain exists, tree will try to grow out of it. Wherever tree grows, flower will try to grow out of it. That's how it happens. And so for specific events, certain relationships are set, and those relationships now compete. One of them outcomes, one of them does not. So once you go into that level, you see how from the poise of supermind, everything is held simultaneously in its highest station, and then relationship sets, and then things flow. In the way the relationships are set, you have the perception of space. There is no other space. Space is the relationships that the Brahman holds with all of its aspects and the interrelations it creates. So there's the sense of an expanse because there are things in the expanse which relate to each other, even if they're unmanifest. If they're unmanifest, you say empty space. When they're manifest, you say two objects, whether they're particles or galaxies, and you have a relationship. But the relationship was there even if they were not manifest. And then in their relation, there are infinite variations in the relation. And those variations of relation now flow, unfolding one after the other, as if in the consciousness of Brahman dwelling on it. I enjoy this, dwell on that, dwell on this relationship, dwell on that relationship. As it flows through all these, in its dwelling, in its dreaming, in its concentration, you have the sense of an unfolding time. This is what is described in the ancient text of the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. Is it where time unfolding or the divine flowing in time is described as a horse. his entire consciousness flowing, enjoying itself, its possibilities, and unfolding, unveiling, drawing out newer and newer possibilities, and it's flowing as if that's the divine creative consciousness, like the horse, the force, the power with which it flows. And there are descriptions: one eye is the sun, one is the moon, and Agni is the, I don't remember now, the speech, the breath is the Vayu. So all the powers of the divine creative consciousness as they form what is unfolding in the front. And what is now no more relevant is fading out into the past, in the back, in the hind of the horse. Things fading out as if subsiding into the unmanifest, from which they manifested and are again withdrawn into the unmanifest. So that's the sense of time. I don't know if that answers the question, but this would be the perspective in the experience from the highest. And as we approach a more intuitive consciousness, we recognize the sense of space and time as something much more deep and rich than our physical sense of space and time. We understand it also as a crowd of possibilities and influences, which are present in any case. And they're present right now. Even though you don't see them, you sense them. You sense the pulls and pushes on a given situation. And then you're able to intervene when you are more conscious in those things, in those layers, in those parts. You can also intervene in those things. So if, let me give an example here. Sri Aurobindo is steering the freedom struggle in India. So in some part of his consciousness, he's directing the events, nudging, pushing, withholding. He senses the struggles, the difficulties, the resistant parts, intervenes where necessary. And so in that consciousness, it's as if he is pulling against resistance, pushing against resistance, shaping events. And it takes place as if in his own larger universal consciousness, but it acts because identified through individuals and circumstances. In that, he senses the incoming crisis point. Here's a position where he can see that very likely we are heading for a huge breakup, a division, a partition of India. And he sees this far ahead. He sees the chaos which will follow. So 1934, I think, there's the question Purani asks him, because these were all freedom fighters and they had given up the freedom fight to do the sadhana. He says, I'm still worried for India. And Sri Aurobindo says, don't worry, that's already decided. The freedom is certain because it's already done on the higher planes. And then Sri Aurobindo writes, I'm more concerned with what India will do with her freedom. Bolshevism or Gunda Raj, things look ominous. So when he says he's concerned, it's not as if he's an armchair thinker, oh, maybe it will go this way. He's feeling, seeing, sensing this trend. And he sees these two tendencies, Bolshevism, which is a very crude form of communism, and Gunda Raj, which is a crude mafia type rule. We got both practically. And if they were diminished, it was because of the intervention of his consciousness to limit and minimize the damage. But he's navigating, struggling against this. So when he says, I'm concerned with this, it's not like he's thinking and saying, hey, I'm concerned it might happen. He's concerned with it right now in 1934 when he's struggling to prevent it from happening. That's how it would work. So when the Trikala Drishti is experienced, it's not merely a seeing. Remember, the consciousness is in Jnana. Jnana is the first step, then comes Trikala Drishti, isn't it? So in Jnana, in this knowledge experience, you see, feel things as they're unfolding, and you are one with what you know, to whatever degree the height at which you're registering the experience. And then you have the capacity to intervene and to modify. Of course, you're rooted in those resistant parts. And if those parts at that point said, you know what, instead of staying my stupid, numb, dumb person, I choose to open myself to the divine and say, whatever you will. So you're pushing against resistance, and suddenly this part wakes up and says, here, I offer myself to be an instrument. And immediately the divine consciousness can take that up and rapidly flow through to achieve an outcome. Where earlier it experienced huge resistance to making that outcome. So why is this important? Because we are still at that point where things are in the balance. They're turning, but how much? Will they turn rapidly or will it take long? Will it be through much suffering or through less suffering or no suffering? If everybody said, a majority of humanity said, well, let's give up our old way of thinking and open to a higher, newer truth that is before us. And rapidly we would make that transition. That's where all of us have a role and a responsibility. To the extent we choose to open to the divine consciousness as conscious vehicles, instruments, to the extent we let go our past preconceptions and even fears of what might or might not happen, and ask for the divine Shakti, the divine mother, to work through us and do what is best. We become vehicles for a rapid unfolding of the effort that is being made precisely to prevent this kind of a pain and struggle in humanity. So I hope Maureen's question has been sufficiently answered. I'll just look at the chat box and take a look at what's here. So Cosmic is asking, is there a difference between a silent mind and a mind that does not work? Yes, of course. A mind that does not work is a mind in inertia. Inertia, darkness, no consciousness, inability to move, inability to work. Silent mind is a mind which is entirely conscious, capable of all kinds of activity that it might choose to, but it becomes silent in order to receive and open to higher truth. This is a critical element. It's not silent for the sake of being silent. It's silent in order to receive, know, and express a higher truth. Unlike some of the ascetic traditions, and we must make this distinction, it is very important. Unlike some of the ascetic traditions where the silence is intended to snuff out your existence. So when people read Sri Aurobindo, oh, he's saying silent mind. Yeah, my tradition also says silent mind. No, it's very different. Their tradition says silence the mind, kill the mind so that you can be free. Sri Aurobindo says silence the mind so that it can open to higher knowledge and become a vehicle for its expression. It will move because the higher knowledge will move it and express through it. So inertia and dullness is completely contrary to this purpose. So mind that does not work is not what we want. This is a question about gravity. I will not take that up now, but we'll look at other questions. So Revati says, usually the silent mind is challenging for me. Sometimes I come across a quote from the master regarding silence. It's my mind as if falls silent automatically. If I'm careful, I could as if prolong it for a brief period. Yes, you see, that is the superior way. When you receive the influence of the deep silence and your mind spontaneously receiving it becomes quiet. And then if you just stay in the same receptive state, you can easily stay quiet for a long time. Habituate yourself to keeping it quiet. So as a practice, if you open yourself to the peace above and let the peace descend into you, and then you habituate yourself to staying in it, that would be the way by which you will train your mind to become silent, conscious, open, receptive. What do you do then? And then obviously you wait for an insight or an intuition, which you then catch. Or from that silent state, depending on what your particular interest is, you initiate action or work from an insight, from a knowledge, because you're aware, you're conscious. You turn to a problem, and in the state of silent receptivity turning up, you wait for the insight to reveal cause or correction for the problem, etc. So you acquire knowledge in that state, or you become a reflector of a higher knowledge in that state. But you have to train yourself to be able to quiet your mind at will and hold it in that state. Okay, so since this question has come many times about gravity and converging electric fields, it's a discussion I had about the Vedic physics. I'll just answer in brief now, but it's a topic I will take up later, perhaps in more detail. It's the gradient of the field, it's not the charge direction which is important. The contrarian is asking about this question. Sun is positive, Earth is largely negative. It's not about the attraction and repulsion of the charges. It's the gradient of the charge, the spread which makes for gravity, and it doesn't matter which charge it is. That once you are free of the idea of charge, think of the field itself spreading out. On a sphere, you have field lines, and the fact that it spreads out, it's that divergence which makes for the gravitation, not the charge itself. And it doesn't matter which charge it is. Charge will have its own effect of attraction, repulsion. The divergence of the field is what creates the gravitational field. If you can make the divergent field parallel, you would have neutralized the gravity. If you make it the other way, you would have anti-gravity. So it's the field lines and their divergence which you have to control. The charge itself is irrelevant for this. I hope that answers the question. Sorry for the others if it was a technical question. The NN is asking how to know that, knowing which one knows all. How to go about this inner process. Can some session be dedicated to this topic? Yes, in fact, this is the direction of our current study. Jnana is precisely this, the knowledge of the divine consciousness, but knowledge not in a mental verbal, it's an experiential knowledge. You experience the thing, you are what you know. When you gain that, and because that is one and that is all is an expression of it, you have the knowledge of all. That's really the secret. How do you gain knowledge of the one that is all? In identity. You have to become one with it. And that's the process which we will describe. The first few steps of which I'm anticipating will be going through this 3 steps, eventually a 4th step of intuitivizing the mind. Through that, we will see further gradations of opening to higher gradations until we approach the supramental poise of consciousness, in which then all the knowledge is held. Now, you don't have to have reached that even halfway through. With the intuition, you have access pretty much to all knowledge, to limited degrees. When that intuitive consciousness becomes more and more complete and stable, and you begin to live in it, in principle, you have access to all knowledge that you wish to know anything about. And that is well within your reach in this lifetime without too much effort. If you follow the sequence, the gradations of steps that Sri Aurobindo teaches you. So contrarian asking, where are these questions which I read from? They were sent on the email. So there are 2 ways you can post questions. One is in the chat box during the discussions, or you can also send your questions to the email ID integralstudies.in@gmail.com. Earlier, we used to announce at each start of the session, but you have this now. You can write to that for any questions. You can also play back these videos. They stay online. The webcast is every Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. And the videos stay. That's how you can watch them anytime that you like. The advantage of watching live is we can have this kind of an interaction. There's one more announcement I wish to make, because next Saturday and the Saturday after, for specific reasons of other responsibilities, I will not be able to come online. So we will post the next 2 videos of the series which we had started on the supramental manifestation. This is very complementary to what we are currently studying. It describes, it's preparatory to a much longer and deeper discussion of the physical transformation itself. And in some sense covered the missing content of the synthesis of yoga, where he does not directly address the physical transformation. And those were the last writings of Sri Aurobindo. So that series is what I had commented on, and we will post the next 2 talks of that series, and hopefully subsequently every week one. But it's just to let you know that we won't have this continuation of this topic, which we will resume just after, which will be in the first episode of the new year. But we'll keep the momentum of meeting on every Saturday with something new put up. Rashmi says, tradition says Kalidasa practiced mauna, that is silence of speech, before writing, observed nature quietly, used silence to deepen insight and creativity. Yes, but not in the way people understand. So if you sit and don't talk and sit in nature and observe nature, you will not express like Kalidasa. It would rather be what we described earlier to Maya's question, the inner silence, which then naturally reflects in the outer. You don't need to be yapping away all the time. And from that poise of the interiorized consciousness, more open to the intuition, you perceive behind appearances. And the poet sees the truth which is behind appearances and articulates that. And it is that which makes for great poetry or a great novel or a great play or any great creative expression. The greatness of art is when it can reveal that which is beyond your physical sight, but which you sense intuitively or in some subliminal part. And here's somebody who directly perceives what I sensed vaguely and articulates it in a way that it awakens in me that which I sensed vaguely and makes it vivid. That's what makes for great art, isn't it? A great creation. That's what makes it immortal. That's what gives to it a consciousness, growth, evolution value, and a spiritual value if it draws from the spiritual realms. It can also draw from the vital realms or even from the nether realms, but it reveals something which was sensed but not fully visible to you. Or even not sensed, but when you read, it awakens the sense of the truth of it. And so that becomes great art of any kind. Yes, so someone is commenting, Manmohan is saying, is in Savitri, the word mathematics comes at some places. Now, more interesting, in the Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo uses the phrase mathematics of the infinite. And that opens a whole dimension of exploration, which I've touched upon in some of the earlier sessions on mathematics, but there's much more when it goes into the mathematics of infinite. It's one of those very amazing things that you can take a tile of a particular shape and keep joining tiles seamlessly so there are no gaps. If you keep piling up tiles like this, normally you would assume after a point the tiles will begin to repeat their pattern. Logical, right? You arrange a tile, squares for example, you join them, and at some point whatever pattern you create will begin to repeat. But a square is too simple. Create an odd shape, but make it such that they fit. You would assume at some point, eventually after 1,000, million, billion, you have run out of possible combinations and they start repeating. No, in fact, there is not one, but a whole range of variations of shapes where the tile pattern will never repeat, ever, into infinity. A finite piece added unendingly would actually create a pattern that has no repetition ever. Each is unique. Isn't that amazing? It boggles your mind. Here's a glimpse of what actually is possible in a consciousness that is infinite. It can hold an infinite extension, but nothing ever repeats. Each thing is unique. There are no two parts that you can take and say, here I can impose this on that and it matches. Nothing ever repeats. And yet it is a monotone of the same single tile shape that's repeating unendingly. Now, into that, you make infinite variations of the tile shapes and still have them repeating unendingly without ever repeating a pattern. You can see where that kind of exploration could go. And that's the character and quality of the divine infinite consciousness. Not in two-dimensional tiles, not in three-dimensional, but in multifacets of qualities of consciousness. So there's a whole dimension of this thing we can call mathematics of the infinite. And there are relationships between infinities and all that, which also are captured. Truths of that are captured in the mathematics of today, what is called Cantor's infinites. But this goes much more. What Sri Aurobindo describes is much more free and supple in the infinity. So Salakhil is asking how to differentiate between tamasic and sattvic silence. I'm not sure sattvic silence is also what you would want. Tamasic would be purely inertia. You're silent, doing nothing, you're half asleep, let's say, or even fully asleep. A sattvic silence might be something more aware, but might not seek anything particular. What you need is none of these. You need a state of consciousness which is still and open to a higher influence that will fill it, lead it, shape it, or act through it. So there's a higher grade of action which will flow through this silence and to express itself. So your mind becoming silent becomes transparent to a higher flow of knowledge, experience, or action. That is the intention for the sadhana. So to contrarian, yes, the gradient is negative in sign. That's not important. It is the fact that there is a, sorry, it's a technical question. So I'm just staying with the technical part of it. The negative sign is irrelevant. Think of it in terms of absolute value of the gradient. You obviously have a background of mathematics. Think of it purely in terms of absolute value. I'll describe it like this. If you take a wave, you put a drop, a ripple. This is going into the whole logic of gravity and anti-gravity. You put a drop and it creates a wave. And the wave is rippling out and rippling in, let's say, put it in a basin. It ripples out, bounces, comes back. You'll have these round circles, okay? Now, if under the water basin, you put a slant, a slope, because the wave is not only horizontal, it's also vertical. So the portion where the wave approaches the slope has a different resistance than where it's deep. Very quickly, the center will begin to drift towards the deeper side. As it pulses, because there's a resistance here to the density of response of, there's a push from the wave bouncing here, the center of the ripple will shift. That's your gravity. So in the electric field, the divergence is creating this slope, which pushes things in a particular direction. In this case, in the slope, it's the other direction. It's where things converge. The pulsating wave drifts towards that. Why is this important? Because every particle is a phased lock wave. As it's pulsing and there's a gradient in the field, the pulsation tends towards, in this case, towards the center of the field from where the gradient starts. That's your gravity. So the idea is there's no such thing as gravitational force. Gravity is the consequence of a gradient in the ether. You change the gradient of the ether, you will get gravitational effects. And the ether, the gradient of the ether is controlled by electric fields. That's at the core of the whole logic. I don't want to go too much into technicalities, but I was avoiding going too much in this detail. But that's all there is to it. I was very interested to see, I was not prepared for this today, but I was very interested to see about 6 months ago, there was some news article about a scientist who came out with a theory of gravity, where he actually describes gravity as a gradient of electric fields. And he uses the phrase gradient. So if you like, I've saved that link somewhere. I can find it and post it another time. Or maybe after a few days, you will find it in this chat, in the description box. If I find it, I'll post the link there. So Jessica is saying our blood cells have electric charges to ensure they don't clump together. Yes, there's much more to it. It's not just that the cells have electric charge. The electric charges exist inside the cells. A very large number of biological operations within the cells are handled by electric fields. And the electric fields are so high because it's a small space. Even if you put 1 volt inside a cell, single cell, so 1 volt in a distance which is some, I don't know how many micrometers, is equivalent of some million volts in a few centimeters. If you had a 1,000,000 volt electric field at this distance, that's the strength of the electric field inside the cells. So this is a whole dimension of biology which is completely ignored, which opens out a whole range of possibilities for accelerated healing and even regeneration of limbs. And a lot of work was done about this which was published in a book called The Body Electric. For a long time, it used to be out of print. Recently, I found it is back in print, and you can take a look at that for those who are interested. What they did was they put weak electric fields from in specific directions on the body tissue, which caused tissue to regenerate, and in some cases, even got the limbs to regenerate. So I don't remember now the details. It's something I'd seen some 40 years ago. But it's important to know that the body itself has a lot of things happening with electric fields. Again, why is this important? Because it's not just electric fields. Electric fields, remember, are tied to ether flows, which are tied to your subtle physical body, which has an etheric content. So when things are modified in the subtle physical, they influence the biology processes through electric and magnetic phenomena, let's say, which are phenomena of ether flows and ether tensions. So that's how the subtle physical and the gross physical are linked electrically and magnetically, but in a very different way. That link is what you can tap into and modify and actually use to regenerate and heal in the physical tissue. Okay. Salakil is asking how to train to express that silence. Should we put an intention or not? You must have initially an intention to receive the silence. So then you open with a certain aspiration, you feel the presence, you feel the intensity and the depth of silence, get used to feeling it above you, and naturally you'll find it'll tend to settle. But then you can consciously intend it also to settle. When it settles in you, you will feel it deepening, and then you must hold the intention to stay in it and not lose it. So intention is your prime driver to navigate through steps in the experience. Word and intention as the word you can replace by the word aspiration. They're equivalent. But there's a difference. Most people understand the word aspiration as something which is purely an emotional state. So I'm aspiring, I'm wanting intensely, but it doesn't happen. That's not the intention at all. That's why intention is a better word in this case. You want to become conscious. So that's your intention. You turn your attention up and just feel the presence. It's there. That's aspiration. But it's not an emotional, it's not a state of tension or excitation. It's just people misunderstand or misrepresent the term. Feel, hold, direct with your attention. So that guided meditation, which I've referred to before, would be very helpful for you to be able to make that contact with the experience first. Yes, so I think we have finished pretty much all the time we had for today, and we will move on with one last question, which somebody called Sirius is saying, do you have any lectures on the realization and practices on and about the subtle body? Yes, there have been quite a few discussions about it. You will find not only in the Descent of Peace, the way by which you can become conscious of your subtle body. We have had discussions on it on a series which was on occult sciences, and then subsequently again on the out-of-body experiences. So quite a bit of discussions were there. And I want to end with this last question from Brooke, which seems to be serious. How do we stop psychic vampires, say a neighbor who are mean to us, but with a strong psychic bond? By psychic is meant emotional, vital, I suppose. How do we stop thinking or visualizing them when it drains life force? I've tried visualizing something else, meditating, even trying to befriend them. Nothing works, and they waste a lot of my energy. Yes, so we have to be careful. We are using psychic in the way typically it's used as a life force, vital energies and vital attraction, repulsion, or connections. If you find you have a bond of this kind, some connection with them, The more you think of it, the more it trains or the more it draws on. The more you visualize, the more it activates. If you try to visualize something else, that's a better way. But the attempt to visualize something else has implicit that I want to be free of that. So you're thinking of that indirectly, implicitly. So the better way, the best way, in fact, is, or even when you try to befriend them, it makes it worse. The best way is ignore completely. Create a state of equality where you're neither concerned positively nor negatively. And you have something else which is more important and more interesting for you, and direct your attention to the something else. But first, build the base of equality that it does not matter. It's one of the things which will happen also when people enter into the vital worlds. Vital world being vital substance, vital drives, vital desires, primarily drives of that world, depending on the gradations, higher or lower, but still. The mastery of the vital is never done by the vital seizing on the vital. It's always done by bringing an equality. It is the state of equality which will free you. And then you are like lotus in water. Even if the thing touches you, it passes, it does not stick. That's your only way. By first becoming equal, you will be able to then direct your attention to something else, which then you build on. Not as a way to avoid this, because now this is irrelevant by equality. But you build something else and it fades out. The problem with this type of thing, what you've described through the link, is that they feed on you, they feed on your attention. Positive or negative is still attention. The neutrality is what gives nothing, no juice flows. And at some point they disconnect or latch on to something else. That's your starting point. And do not tense yourself about it. Each time that you have a reaction to it, you're feeding it. No reaction. Complete equality. So you again come back to the first Chatushtaya, the first limb of the integral yoga, equality and peace. Build this and turn your concentration then to something positive which is important to you. That's enough for today then. Come back to the main topic, which is the divine knowledge, which we are studying in the context of the Sri Aurobindo's record of yoga. And we will continue this sometime later, after 2 weeks, the third week, first week of January. But on your own, I would recommend for you to review this text. I have put the links, including the links of what we will be studying subsequently. So if it interests you, you might want to read those chapters from the Synthesis of Yoga also, but put it into practice. Our goal, remember, is not merely to understand, but to live these things. This yoga is meant for that. And everything that we're discussing, start putting it into practice. Build this base of deep silence, peace in the mind. Let it soak into your life energies. Let it soak into your biology, into the nervous system and physical tissue. Let it surround you in your environing aura. Hold this dense, deep peace. Habituate yourself to it. And with it, the state of mind becoming quiet, still. Doesn't have to be perfectly still. Just quiet is good. In the state of quietness, turn it to the higher knowledge that you seek to know, or the specific direction of experience that you want to develop. But practice this opening to the presence. Let the presence settle into you, and more habituate yourself to it. Work on this. It is worthwhile. I assure you, your life will change completely. And it doesn't take much in terms of your effort, because what descends will do all the rest. Let's take a moment to concentrate in this aspiration and take steps in daily life to grow in opening, self-giving, and receptivity to the working of the divine Shakti in you, beginning with the descent of her peace, and with all the rest that will follow, her presence of light and love and knowledge and power and everything that will fill you eventually.